This video is sponsored by Aura.
Hello, my sweet dandelions. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me. As many of you will know, I am very interested in the process of shadow work and the idea of the shadow as an archetype to describe something that happens with the human psyche. There is a massive bunch of videos that I've already made over time, so there's a playlist. I'll link it for you down below. So what is the shadow? Okay, in essence, the shadow in your psyche comprises of anything that the ego has outright rejected about you, and it finds itself submerged, okay, in the darkness of the unconscious. It's out of the way, tucked out of view, so that you don't have to see it, accept it, acknowledge it, or work to change it. It's right on the fringes of your awareness, if it's even in your awareness at all. And there is a very strong argument that most of the things in your shadow as an individual you do not know about. Your behaviors may betray your shadows, but you are not consciously aware of them, and therefore you are not and cannot do any work to kind of integrate them, to accept them, to understand why they are there, and to ensure that they have less power over your actions and decisions and behaviors, right? So in this video, we're going to explore how you even discover a piece of your shadow. How do you even get to know that something is in shadow in your mentality, that you have been ignoring something, pushing something away, trying not to address something that you have shoved away into the shame basement, basically, in your psyche? How do you find out what is there if the shadow is so elusive and it's actually intended to be, by design, difficult to detect, right? Because your ego does not want to detect it. So how do we end up knowing that something is in shadow? What are the various different ways that will happen? I'm going to break down a few key ways today. So, darlings, let's go shadow hunting. One of the ways that I think we can detect something that is in our shadowscape and we bring it to consciousness is through cataclysmic realization. Okay, so this is the very dramatic, very intense end of the spectrum where something happens in your life, or you have a really sort of like paradigm breaking conversation. You have to accept something very quickly, or you have to realize something because of events that have unfolded. And it is all very kind of like Greek drama kind of stuff. It's that level of intensity, and it's very much like a tower moment. And in that moment, you realize that you have been harboring secret biases, or you have been harboring secret fears, that something has happened that you have actually always unconsciously, somewhere deep down inside of you, dreaded would happen. And now it is happening. You need to face it. You need to do something about it. It's very alarming at first, and it can create a spiritual emergency of sorts, or a dark night of the soul, maybe. But we begin to understand that, like, oh, this has always been something that I have riled against, or I have always been expecting, as though it's been some kind of like spectre in my midst. And I was always expecting that at one point or another, I would have to face it. I would have to do something about it. It could simply be that a loved one in your life, somebody that you always respected and you were close to, starts kind of like talking about ideas that you never realized you had a strong bias against, or they enter into a lifestyle that you never realized always freaked you out or disgusted you. And you suddenly have to kind of like make the connection between this thing that's actually very shadowy for you, you've realized, and this person that you love and want to support, right? It can be something of that nature. It can be that you have a massive change in your life and you need to get used to being a different version of you, or maybe a version of you with different needs or a different outlook. And you begin to realize that, like, this is really turning everything on its head. It's showing me that previously in my life, I have been biased against people like the person that I now am, or I have really, really dreaded the kind of life that I now have to live. And so things appear to us in this very dramatic fashion, and we have to go into that tower mentality of like, okay, I guess everything from before is crumbling. I am now coming into being a new version of myself. I'm seeing the world differently, and I need to deal with that. So our shadows can very dramatically confront us. They can break into our psychic home, if you will, and stand in front of us like full frontally with a grimace on their faces, fully armed. And you're like, I didn't know you were here. So it can be that kind of way. Something can break free from the basement or enter through a window and just make us realize that, like, okay, I actually need to deal with the fact that this has always been somewhere deep down inside me. And when you realize it, you start to look back over the timeline of your life and you put the pieces together and you think, I did react really aggressively in that situation and I never knew why. I remember that relationship went down the tubes and I couldn't figure out why. And now I realize it was that shadow. So you start putting things together, you become a little bit of a detective and you realize that, like, okay, this shadow has been with me a while, or this shadow was something that I learned in my childhood, or this shadow is to do with shame that is related to family. And it's been actually blighting a lot of different areas of my life. It's been bleeding into different areas. And so actually the cataclysmic realization, the tower moment that breaks you away from the previous version of yourself, is actually this weird, dramatic blessing in disguise, because it shows you suddenly your eureka moment that, like, you know what? I am now being faced with one of my shadows and I need to actually interact with it. I need to figure out, like, why is it there? How might my life be better if I acknowledged it and decided that, yes, I'm going to work on it? What do I need to do to work on it? How has it been interrupting my life so far? You know, so that really puts a lot of things on the table. Has anyone had a cataclysmic realization, a tower moment where they have been faced with shadow content in a very dramatic way? If you feel like sharing, please go ahead and share your ideas down in the comments, share your experiences with us. Let us learn from your understandings and how you reached them. I think there's also a lot to be said for things like cultural shifts, right? And emergences of certain cultural conversations. When we start to come into contact with certain debates that are going on, certain things that we're seeing a lot in media or on the news, certain things that are trending on social media that suddenly everybody is talking about, those kinds of things might not necessarily constitute a massive tower moment in our personal reality, but they represent a big shifting of the needle culturally, right? And so we're put into contact with something that we're having a very psycho-spiritually violent reaction to. We wish everybody would shut up about it and stop talking about it. We feel very aggressive or defensive when that topic comes up, and we cannot wait for the vibes to switch culturally so that we can get away from this topic or get away from this debate. And we start to realize that, like, okay, my reaction to this is almost physiologically uncomfortable. Why is that? Why can I not deal with this topic? Why am I angry with my friends when they're asking me, what do you think about it? Did you read this think piece on it? And I'm like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Right. So we start to realize that, like, yeah, I'm having a really, really strong reaction. I'm very uncomfortable with the fact that this conversation is occurring and culturally a lot of stuff is happening around that subject. And then you start to realize, I have a problem with this. This is something that really shakes me in my foundation. And I actually don't like that. I want to go down into the basement of my psyche, find whatever little monster is hiding down there, pull it up, and examine it in the light, which is exactly what shadow work is. It's basically just acknowledging that, like, there's something in there that's causing interruptions or causing fear, and it's stopping me from really living fully. It's stopping me from being able to live in sovereignty and not being so fearful of fear all the time, right? So we do our shadow work because we realize, I want a better life than this. And I want to be honest in front of myself. And I don't want this running the show. I want to understand what is down there in the roots of me and why is it there? And how can I start to integrate it so I'm less afraid and so that I do live more fully in my truth.
Darlings, today's video is sponsored by Aura. It's an incredible wellness and sleep app that is used by over 7 million people worldwide. Sometimes when I need a mental refresh and I'm just ingesting a lot of things that are not necessarily that great for me, I can switch to Aura and I can get some of that quality goodness. I humbly invite you to join the 30-day meditation challenge so that you can really go in hard and do something every 30 days. I'm going to leave a link to a playlist that I've made down below. It's called the Inner Work playlist and it's got some really good places for you to start. It does have meditations on there, but I do favor the life coaching and the podcast as well. And I've selected various different topics, including shadow work, on that playlist. So enjoy, okay? I made it for you and I'm adding new things all the time. The first 500 people to click the link in the down bar below can get started with Aura completely free. And alongside the free trial, you also get 25% off your subscription if you choose to go ahead with it. So it's an incredible deal. It really helps the channel when you do, and it will help your wellness. There is no question of that. Thank you so much for listening to this sponsorship information. Thank you to Aura for sponsoring me. And let's get back to talking about the shadow, darling.
Projection is definitely a thing. A lot of awareness of your shadow content that has been out of reach, out of sight, you haven't been aware of it. It can come up when you realize that you strongly are projecting a specific quality or a specific idea onto someone or onto a group of people. I'm going to read here from this book, Romancing the Shadow: How to Access the Power Hidden in Our Dark Side by Connie Zweig and Steve Wolf. It's an amazing book. I'm giving it a reread lately and I'm really loving it. And in the book, it says this: the shadow disguises itself in our projections when we react intensely to a trait in others that we fail to see in ourselves. If we feel disgusted, for example, gee, she turns my stomach, or incredulous, such as, I can't believe he would actually do that, or embarrassed, that makes me really uncomfortable, by another's trait or behaviour, and our response is exaggerated, then we may be seeing an aspect of our own shadow indirectly, out there where it is safer to observe it. We project by attributing this quality to the other person in an unconscious effort to banish it from ourselves. Whom do you hate or judge the most? What group of people most repulses or terrifies you? What is it that you cannot stand in a friend or family member? Now, I want to be really clear, okay? I do think that the word projection can be super overused. I do think that it is not every single time that we have a strong reaction to someone's behavior or outlook on life that it is a projection of something that is inside us. But I do think that I have noticed in my own life that when I very exaggeratedly and quickly judge or assume or start painting somebody with a very, very negative view based on extremely limited information, that is interesting to me. That is something that I think, could that stand a little bit of exploration? Do I need to investigate that? And I have definitely noticed over time patterns of projection, whereby I have later come to understand that I am looking at something in other people that I have been very, very nervous to admit exists within me. And I do need to do that work. So every exploration is a bit different. I don't think that it's a one size fits all thing and that every single time we are extremely and immensely irritated by somebody's character, it is a projection. I think that would be, a little bit of a stretch, but I do think it's worth interrogating a little bit. I do think that those people who are sincere shadow workers will be interested in seeing what's down there and just having a little check. I think a lot of shadow work for me, the day-to-day stuff, is just having a little check, just checking something out. If I had a very dramatic reaction or what I consider to be an overreaction to somebody's way of being or somebody's way of behaving, and especially if I don't really know them or if they're a celebrity, there's somebody that I have really limited knowledge of, that kind of thing, I look at it and I'm like, why are you bugging out? What's going on? Why is your nervous system getting all woo? Like, what's happening there? And I find it very interesting to examine that. And because I'm not afraid of examining something that might be in the shadowscape for me, I think it's really gleaned some interesting results. Have you ever noticed that you were projecting and that actually when you looked inwardly, you thought to yourself, I'm actually irresponsible in that way, or like, I've been like that in the past and maybe I'm judging a former version of myself from when I wasn't as savvy or as spiritually conscious as I am now, or what, I actually often pretend that I don't have that problem, but I actually do. If I really was going to be honest, that's something I need to explore. Has that happened to you? If you're brave, if you're feeling courageous, let us know. When have you realised that you were projecting and that indeed you did need to bring it home, bring it back to the self and understand where that same problem or weakness resides inside of you, instead of looking outwardly and projecting that outwardly so that you don't have to face it within you. One thing that's very interesting, I think, about shadow work is that sometimes we can very, very overtly admire somebody or a group of people based on an assumption that we have that we do not contain those same qualities that we are admiring in those people. I think that can also be a form of projection. If we look at somebody and we're like, I could never ever live that way, I could never be that brave, I could never take the path that that person has taken, it's just not in me to be able to do that, it's so impressive. Sometimes when we feel that way, that's just kind of within the normal range and it's not a projection. But I think sometimes it can be a symbol of something that is in what what is known as the golden shadow. Okay, the golden shadow is the part of the shadow where you might have stuffed some things that are actually extremely positive and have great personal and cultural value. Things like artistic potential, things like bravery and authenticity in owning your voice, things like kindness and the ability to create strong friendships or community, right? All of these different things that we largely consider to be forces for good and ways to create harmony and beauty, you might have stuffed a few of them in your shadow, okay? Especially if those qualities were not valued in childhood, or you were never praised for them, they were never recognized in you, or maybe you were even raised to see them as signs of weakness. I think sometimes when we look at somebody and we have a very extreme feeling that we could never be them, we could never be like them, we could never make decisions the way they do, we would never have thought of that thing that they thought of. When it's very extreme to the point where it's making us feel bad about ourselves or it's making us feel less than, maybe we need to look into that golden shadow kind of concept and see what is there. Like, maybe I'm telling myself I could never do that, but like, on what grounds? What information am I going on to make that decision that I could never be that kind of person, or I could never be so kind or so open or so giving or so artistic, right? So I think it's really that. Like I said, exactly like with projection to the negative, projection that speaks to the positive has to be extreme. It has to be something that you realize is actually not healthy for you, I think, in order for it to be a suggestion that it's based on something that's in shadow. I do think sometimes we can just look at somebody, right? Like the way I look at Simone Biles and think, I could never, ever do those backflips. I could never be that disciplined and that physically agile and that whatever. When I look at that, I don't think, oh my God, I'm projecting. I'm really like a gold medal athlete. Clearly, that is a projection of my golden shadow. No, I just think Simone Biles is an alien and like we need to give her flowers, okay, in this life and the next. So it's not that. But sometimes I have definitely looked at people and thought, those kind of people, I could never be that way. I'm just not, I don't have those minerals. I don't have those parts. I could never be that fiscally responsible. I could never be that daring enough to do that thing. I could never, like, I have done this. And then I thought, is something in my golden shadow there? Maybe there's something that I actually need to claim, that I need to own, that maybe I was never taught I could be. Or maybe I've just always made different choices. And so I'm telling myself now that I don't have the right to try and make different choices. And that's shadow content. That's something that I hadn't realized was stuck in the unconscious, holding me back. So have a questioning with yourself as well about, have you ever looked at somebody and really admired them or really envied them or really pitted yourself against them in a very extreme way where you've been like, oh, I could never. And it's made you feel bad or it's made you feel less than. And then when you really look at it, you might notice that's something in your golden shadow. There is some piece of treasure in the shadow that you have rejected on some basis, either because of fear or, like I said, because of parental conditioning, but something is there, something is down there lurking. Addictions are a pretty big one, I think. They can be a very strong indicator of something that we're trying to run away from. I think addiction can be like loud music that we start playing over the screaming that is coming from the psyche, right? The psyche starts calling out, it starts expressing some kind of distress, it's sending out some kind of SOS, and instead of listening to it, sitting with the pain that is down there and dealing with it, we turn to a substance or a behavior. And that can definitely be a little bit like turning the music up max volume in order to drown out what is going on in that wounded part of the psyche. And so whenever we are experiencing addictive behaviors, whenever we keep doing things that we really don't actually want to do, but we find that in that moment they are pleasurable or they provide some kind of release, yes, definitely that can be attributed to something that needs to be dealt with in shadow. Sometimes it's wounds that you outright know that you're trying to run from, but I think sometimes we don't really know what it is we're running from, but there could be something down there. Certainly for me, with some of my addictive behaviors in the past and some of my very sort of repetitious bad habits, I have looked at what triggers me to go into those bad habits, and I talk about this a little bit in my bad habits video, which I will link down below for you. Magic, looking at magic and witchcraft to deal with bad habits. I talk about looking at the triggers and really being very clear about when those addictive patterns come up. When do those repetitive cycles of bad habits come into view? that can really take you into shadow work territory. It can be very interesting. You can suddenly see that you have chosen to not answer the call of the self, and that actually every time that call has sort of come into your awareness a little bit, you've started overspending, or you've started being addicted to the phone, or you've started drinking, or you've started whatever it is that you're doing, and you suddenly realize like, oh yeah, there is something that is so far out of the grasp of my concept of myself, because I want it to be that far out. I don't want to look at it. But when it starts to come into view, that's when the bad habit kicks in. That's when the addictive cycle starts. And even if I've been okay and I haven't partaken in that addictive cycle, when the psyche starts doing its little shadow pain thing, I start turning the music up, right? That's what I think addictions can very often be. So that is an interesting way that people find themselves to understanding something about their shadow. When the very disciplined conscious mind starts to lose its grip, it loses its control, what comes up in those spaces can be very interesting. So, for example, when we dream, a lot of shadow content can present itself in our dream state. Things that we do not worry about and things that do not really trouble us in our waking life might find an outlet, an exit sort of wound, if you like, in the form of dreams. And some themes that come up in dreams we may later realize are linked to our shadow content. The same can happen with our daydreams, okay, with our idle fantasies, wherever our brain goes when we are kind of like, you know, we've released control of the wheel, okay? We're not applying our mind, we're letting our mind wander. When we think about where the mind goes, and we are surprised maybe by where it goes, or we realize that we have a fixation that we like to visit when we are wandering, okay, with our brain, that can actually provide information about shadow content. And the same can be true when we are under the influence of substances that are making us feel like we are not our usual selves, and our minds can explore all kinds of different weird and winding pathways in the west wing of our brain mansion. And suddenly we're like, I've never been in this room before. This is really weird. Well, why am I thinking of this? Why is this here? That can also sometimes be something that when we later explore it, we realize it is linked to shadow. The body definitely gives us some clues, okay? So the body can tell the truth about our reaction to something or how we're feeling about something when the mind is really sticking to the script, right? So the mind could be very much like, no, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm doing, this is what needs to happen. But the body is betraying another reality. The body is saying something different. So for example, one way that I have always kind of known that I am deep down feeling something different to what I'm saying is I have facial expressions that betray me. So in my therapy a couple of times, I have said something to my therapist and I sound very, very convinced of it. And I'm trying to be very kind of like, that's the way I feel. And my therapist will say, you're smirking. What's happening there? Your face is doing something very different to the words that you're coming out with. And I'm wondering if there is another reality behind the one that you are expressing. And there was actually a previous partner of mine that noticed that as well. And it was in a really fucking shadowy way. Okay. So just to defend myself before I tell this story, this ex-partner of mine, she was really a nasty piece of work, and she was cheating on me and lying to me. Okay, this was a very long time ago, but just so you know, she was no angel, all right? But I was having an argument with her, a little tiff with her, and we ended the tiff and everything was like okay on the surface kind of. But then I said something to her as I was turning to leave, and it was something that I knew would make her jealous and it would make her feel insecure. And I thought, as though I had no idea that this would be something that would cause her to feel insecure. And then I left. And then later on, we had a discussion about it. And she said, you knew that would make me upset. That's why you said it. That's why you did it. And I was like, that's outrageous. I had no idea it was going to make you upset. And she said, I saw you smirking when you left. You said it. And then I saw this little smirk on your face, like you were really pleased with yourself that you'd said something that would like put me on edge. And I thought, oh my fuck, my body's betraying my truth, which is that I was trying to upend her because she was trying to upend me and I was trying to play her game. But I thought I could be clever. I thought I could outwit, right? But actually the body demonstrates to other people sometimes your shadowy intentions for things. And certainly it can betray your own shadows around something that you're doing or whatever. Sometimes if you feel that you want to be super confident about what you're going into, the business deal you're signing or the wedding you're about to have with somebody or whatever, sometimes it will be your body that will start to tell you something that is trapped in the unconscious that you really don't want to admit to, that you've really tried to shove right away, and your body will start doing things. It will start to get really nervous, or you'll feel a lot of adrenaline or whatever, and you'll be like, what is wrong with me? Why is my body doing this? Or why am I feeling really sluggish? I don't want to get up to do this thing that I've told everybody I want to do. Sometimes that is your body's way of saying, no, there's another reality down there. Try again. Okay. The thing that you're saying that you want and the thing that you're projecting outwardly that you want is not the thing that is actually really happening in your heart. So sometimes your body will start to tell you a different story that rejects your official truth, your official statement to the public that the ego is giving. The body is like, no, don't believe a word of it. Fuck that. That's not the truth.
Truth. You can't handle the truth.
Finally, my darlings, one way that I have noted shadow content, and I have thought, I'm bumping up against something there that is definitely from the very mysterious side of my psyche, is through very, very hysterical, very full on kind of over the top reactions to things. Okay. And I know that they say that if it's hysterical, it's probably historical. And I do stick to that viewpoint. I do think that if I have an intensely explosive reaction to something, an intensely overwrought, emotional, sad, or worried reaction to something, and I know that by my standards it is an overreaction, I look at that and I'm like, what's happening there? That reaction was totally not in alignment with the severity of the thing that was happening. And I know that by my own standards. I don't really accept other people telling me when I'm overreacting, because unfortunately in a previous toxic family connection that I experienced growing up, the person who I now do not speak to and would never speak to again, told me frequently that I was overreacting and I was being dramatic and I was being so overreactive and I was being dramatic, and obviously I was not doing anything of the sort. I was reacting to their very real emotional abuse. So when somebody else tells me I'm overreacting, I take that with a rather large bag of salt. There's probably about 3 people in the world, 4 if you include my therapist, whom I would allow to tell me that I'm overreacting, because actually my reactions are valid. Everybody's reactions are valid. But I think we can know for ourselves when we're overreacting. And there are perhaps very close people to us who might be able to say, honey, you're really activated right now. What is going on? Something else is going on. You would not normally behave this way. And we can actually trust what they say, right? We can put some stock in what they're saying. For me, when I am hysterical, I wonder if it's historical. When I'm overreacting, I wonder if something is underlying, okay? That's how I do business. That's how I work with myself. And it's been very useful for me in identifying things that I have shoved into the shadow basement. I never wanted to see them again. I had no idea they were there because I didn't want to know they were there. But with that overreaction, I have thought, wait a minute, this is an overreaction. This is absolutely a total like blowing out of proportion of something that I usually would be able to deal with in a very calm manner. So why is that happening? Why have I had that overreaction? And if I had the overreaction with somebody else or towards somebody else, I will apologize and I will say, I'm sorry, I need to go away and just like have some time because something has happened there. I have bumped up against something inside of me that was not pleasant and that I dealt with from a very extreme place. So I apologize for my overreaction and I will go away now and think about what just happened because I need to figure that out. And I'm fully happy to say that to somebody in my life. I'm happy to say something's down there and I need to go look at that because that's not what I expected to have happen in my responses. Something came up that was just really like, whoa, okay, chill out, you know? So if you know that sometimes there can be very, very strong overreactions and afterwards you are shocked by the way you behaved, might be good to look at that. That's all I'm saying. There might be something down there, my loves. There might be a Loch Ness monster swimming around in your basement, in your psyche basement, I guess. Darlings, I have absolutely loved taking you on this exploration of various different ways that you might be able to see some shadow stuff and know it for what it is. Thank you so much. I am a qualified spiritual counsellor and a professional tarot reader. If you would like to book in with me for a session or a reading, you can do so down below. I will leave the link to my store and you'll be able to to peruse through my massive selection of readings, mentoring sessions, spiritual counseling sessions, etc. I do workshops, so make sure that you check back to see what kind of workshop I might be running. I do have one coming up. I have a novena on the way on Patreon. If you want to pray a novena with me, get over there. We are starting at the end of January. Grab a rosary. It is time for us all to pray to the Holy Mother in this dark year of our Lord 2025. Thank you so much to Aura for sponsoring this video. I am so grateful to you. You are such an amazing platform, and it's a privilege to be able to work with you. So thank you so much to Aura. Yes, and please don't forget to click the link down below. So much love until next time, my darlings, and blessed be. Happy shadow working. Mwah.